kinds of communications we've received this year, on my 2 years of board service, particularly this year, but also last year, around the question of kindergarten enrollment and class size. And it's certainly something that members of our community feel very passionately about. They're very actively engaged in communicating with us around these issues. And I just wanted to say that we need to look very carefully at any proposed growth in terms of kindergarten size.
Lisa?
I was struck, Brett, by what you said about parity across the 3 buildings, and that resonates with me as well. Not to suggest that there's been anything other than good faith efforts on the part of any of the administrators here. I don't mean to suggest that at all. However, one thing that I was struck by in looking at these lists was that, in general, it looked to me as though the reductions that we saw in a lot of the areas, it was difficult for me to come up with a reason without knowing the background as to why certain things were reduced by small amounts in many areas rather than, sort of eliminations in some areas. I understand nobody wants to eliminate budget items, so I get that. And I also saw that there were some that were eliminated. But I am wondering whether there could be some thought given to more emphasis on eliminations across the board that would, I don't want to be glib here. I realize how serious this is, but, sort of make the pain more uniformly felt, I guess. I do understand Brett's concern about the issue with the class sizing in the younger grades, and I think I have a great deal of sympathy for Rick's view of how important it is to, as a priority for the district generally, to make that something that we try to keep away, try to keep in our minds and keep away from affecting if we can. And maybe I am misconstruing what I'm seeing, and I would certainly be happy for some input from people more knowledgeable than I, but that was my impression as I looked across, and I think particularly the Tier 2 cuts.
Well, maybe that's a question to throw out there for the administrators, as to why they reduce something by X amount of dollars instead of throwing it out entirely. I'm not sure that really addresses the issue of coming up with a list of potential cuts that they can live with if they have to for the coming year. So living with a reduction rather than cutting everything out might be more feasible to them as people who are administering these budgets on a day-to-day. But, I'd open the floor to any of those individuals sitting out there who would like to address that question in particular, just to give you a frame of reference from where they sit as building principals.
Okay.
Or other administrators.
Is there a particular, it would help me if you have a particular line that I can speak to?
Well, I can take one at random. I did not go through this and highlight items where there were small reductions and say, well, how come, only $500 rather than the whole ball of wax. If that would be helpful in the process, then let's do that. Okay, so let's let me see. Of course, having said that, I'm not, my eye is not alighting on any. Okay, so in the tier 2 list, Ed, since you spoke up, I'm gonna pick on you. Okay, on page 2, building priority 11, district priority 3, other expenses, high school art, omit unplanned expenses, and we went from $800 to $400. So, I mean, obviously that doesn't close the gap entirely all by itself, but why not take the $800 out?
It's really a question of the grade in that particular line. I think I certainly want to be in the position to be able to support a request from an art teacher in the middle of the year for a particular project that they've learned about. They need certain supplies to put in place. So that, sort of the midway that allows me to say, yeah, let's do that. We have $400 to support that, rather than to say, no, we can't do that this year.
So let me ask, if I may, let me just ask a question. I'm directing it at you, but it's not really directed just at you. In the process where the administrators were asked to bring forward lists of things that they would cut and how much of it they would cut, was this developed in isolation from one another, or did you collaborate and talk about, I don't want to sound crass and, make it sound like horse trading, but, did you talk about what the general priorities are and how to weigh one against the other, or were you just doing your building and what was important to your building and your program?
Well, please jump in. We communicate. Obviously, we're a small district. We've been through this process a number of times, so I think we're all aware already of our priorities. So yeah, we communicate. That being said, we advocate respectfully for our own programs, but we all know what our respective priorities are. I don't know if that's a fair statement of how we work together.
I think to be very specific, did I put all of these individuals in a room and say, don't come out till there's $300,000 worth of cuts that you can all agree on? No, because we'd still be in that room. With all due respect, because they are advocating for their own programs, and they know their own buildings and their own buildings' needs and their own teachers' needs better than any of the others, and they may be one way in one building and another way in another building, which is why I've given them the autonomy to come up with things that they know they need for their building and that they can do without all of or do without some of, and I don't attempt in any way to try to micromanage that either, because they have their own needs.
Diane?
When I looked at this list too, I immediately thought the same thing. It's heavy on certain buildings and not others, but I would strongly caution the board to not look at it this way, because we are a small district, and each of the administrators has to make the hard cuts for their buildings and add programs when they think is necessary. And it's Joe's job to look at the entire district and look at the cuts. And I wouldn't want to just say, every building needs to cut X dollars. I'd want to cut what we could afford as a district to cut, even if it all comes from one building or one source, instead of, just taking from every building, because that seems more fair. So I would just, caution to not look at it that way.
I'd like to go back to the comments that Brett made. Brett and I had a knockdown, drag-out fight in his office yesterday when we discussed this. But we did discuss this yesterday, and I would just raise a couple of questions, and it goes to the comment I made earlier today about placeholders. Okay, so the two questions in my mind, I don't have the answers for them as I sit here right now. But if we put a placeholder for that position in the budget, cross that off our list, okay? And it turns out we have 59 kids going into kindergarten next year after the dust clears. Are we going to hire a fourth kindergarten teacher because there's a placeholder there? Don't anybody answer that, but I would respectfully submit to you that there will be a lot of pressure to hire that teacher if we don't need that teacher. And I'm not talking about from Brett. Okay? So that's just one observation. The second question is, if we don't put a placeholder for that position in the budget, and we wind up having 72 kids, as I asked the question earlier, where do we get the money for those kids? So I want to make it clear that I'm not sitting here advocating for large class sizes in kindergarten or in any other grade level. What I do have a problem with is using, and I'm not saying that Brett's advocating for this, so I don't want anybody to misunderstand me, but when you put a placeholder in, there is this predilection to say, well, you have the money in the budget, why not hire them so we can have, the classes will be that much smaller. And when I'm looking at a $300,000 gap, I don't know that we have the luxury of doing that. That said, the question about if we don't put this placeholder, put this in the budget as a placeholder, and the numbers get up to a level where we really need to have a fourth section in that, at that grade level, where does it come from, is, I think, a very important question. Now, somebody, I think Laura, raised the question, well, could you have 3 sections in one of the other grade levels? I mean, that could be a potential answer to that question. I don't know if there are other answers to that question. We'd have to plumb the depths of that question some more, but I think you have to answer that question satisfactorily if you're not going to be putting the placeholder in. But I would not sit here and advocate for using that money just because it's in the budget. And that's easy for me to say around this table on this Saturday morning, and it's a whole other conversation when there's 18 parents of incoming kindergarten kids say, you have the money, you can reduce class sizes. So I'm just saying. Just saying. In a perfect world, it'd be a wonderful thing. We're dealing with a $3,000 gap, so it's far from a perfect world. $300,000.
$3,000 gap, we all dig into our pockets.
See, I'm in denial. I'm in total denial here. So that's the situation, and it's challenging. That's why we're spending our time on a Saturday morning.
And I'd like to add one other thing. It's not a one-year thing either. I mean, if you're talking this is $100,000, by you adding that extra person is really an $800,000 one, because you're going to have 7 years of that teacher with that 4 grade levels moving on through. So it's not a 1 year, I got it in the budget. You got to have that now in the budget for the next 7 years. Kindergarten through, 6 years. I forgot we go through 5th grade. So it's a 6-year commitment you're making. So, you might have it in the budget the first year, but if things get tighter, then you got to start pulling back. And just to forewarn you, you're hiring a teacher. It's not a 1-year hire.
Rick?
Yeah, that's kind of why I brought it up in the first place. I didn't want to drag anybody down. We just had a heck of a good discussion here, folks, and I think that's what this meeting is about. I think we've all, including myself, have had my consciousness raised here even this morning. And, I've been in this business a long time at a lot of levels. I'm still not in favor of this, but I understand. I understand all of that. And I think we all understand a little better than before I raised my hand to start with what this is about. So let's keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Diane?
I have one more question for Brett, but I'm sure you'll keep us up to date with the numbers.
Yeah,
as we
of
move
course.
Next week. What would be your ideal number for kindergarten per section of students? So 20 would be the highest you'd want to go?
Yeah, studies historically show that, especially in that age, the closer you get to like 10 to 1, 11 to 1 ratio adult to student in class, the better off. So obviously, if that comes with the aid, it's not fully instructional, but it does just make a difference. So that's usually the number for me that I think about as we start moving about what we have been doing in recent years. Also on top, there are also the students that we have this kind of information from. So placement is always more difficult. We try to work with any CPSC students coming in, try to kind of figure out who needs what, but it's also a huge learning curve for students because we just don't have the info. So we get them in the room and start working on. There are some side preschools that do an amazing job again. Their feedback on students that come into my building. I've actually tried to work the last year also on those relationships to try to get information to them that we can possibly get back, or if they would have something they can send me to. So we'll see what comes in towards the end of this year, maybe I'll see more, and that also helps too. But they are the students that we historically know the least about, and we learn the most about their first year. So.
Is that 20 student number, is that like your K through 2 number? Would you say the same thing for 5th grade? 20 or?
I mean, in general, 20 is what I try to think, just talking historically, what the district has tried to keep in place, but certainly, yeah, those numbers can get slightly larger. What we wind up seeing with the 4 sections, when they leave, even when we have 3 sections in K, we wind up seeing management class sizes in those other grades. And yet, right now I have a pretty large 3rd grade class, primarily because of those needs I mentioned. Next year, we're going to have, because I have one general ed 3rd grade class with like 23 kids in it. The other classes have like 19, along those lines, and they're highly supported. That becomes a tough number with anyway as well. So the inclusion classes, like 15 or 16, we have to keep that much lower than normal. Again, because of what we're working with staffing and things like that. But 20 is a good number.
Thank you.
Lisa?
I saw John's hand up, but I
I
want to
did
know
too.
what he has to say.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to a comment that both you and Diane made about the tier 2 cuts and disparities. I just want to point out that Ed, Brett, and I did things slightly differently. So when you look, for example, on the first page of the tier 2 cuts, Brett has all of his general supply codes broken down. If you go up, the second item on the tier 2 page is my general supplies. I lumped all of those codes together and then reduced by that total number. Again, that comes into other expenses and those sorts of things too. So I just want to point out, if you look at the general supply codes in the elementary school, they total $53,000 to start, but they're broken out and then reduced per code.
So if you're counting numbers of items, that could be misleading, which is why I tended to prioritize them with the same number, because in my mind, I was lumping them together.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
And I really do like how John does it.
Makes for a shorter
It's a lot less work.
I don't want my English teachers and my math teachers arguing over
Which
Supply will be reduced.
And Ed's okay with that, I guess. All right.
Fight it out.
grade levels at both.
I have a couple of questions, just not to belabor this point, but we might as well. Brett, would you remind us how many per class in this year's 5th grade, which is 3 sections?
Current 5th, 20, 24, 25. So the inclusion class is 20, the supporting class is 24, and then general class is 25.
Yeah, I'd also share with you that I got an email earlier this week. Apparently my colleagues in other school districts in the county are doing the same kind of thing now. But I got an email from the superintendent of a school district that's, quite a bit larger than Rhinebeck, polling his colleagues about what the class sizes were in K and 1, and whether there were any teacher aides or teaching assistants assigned to those classes. And that particular school district, just as a frame of reference, had 27, 28 per class in grades K and 1 with no teacher aides or teaching assistants. Just so you get an idea that we are fortunate to be where we are, and I'm not saying that in a negative way in any way, shape, or form. I'd much rather have what we have than some other school districts in our immediate area, and we should be thankful that we're able to, at least up to this point, maintain such an advantageous teacher-student ratio. So just saying.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions?
on that topic?
We
or
got the
moving
first
on?
line done.
I think we've gotten all we can get out of that one for today. Anybody want to grab a hold of something else on that list?
Yes.
All right, I saw Diane's hand a split
Over
second
here.
before you did.
All right, I'm just going to skip around maybe. So I think this would be for Marvin. This is, there you are. So
Where are
this, I'm
Tier
on
one.
Second one
Tier
from the bottom.
1, under curriculum, sunsetting of the creative services support. So this is phasing out the Aussies program, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's currently, the district has 24 days in the BOCES COSER for that project, and we put 6 more of those days into the Title II grant for a combination of 30 days. And since we've been working on this project, I don't know, 7 or 8 years or so, we really put a heavy focus on the balanced literacy project as it were, implementing, reading and writing workshop across all the sections of the first phase of that project. Since the pivot to the Common Core Learning Standards and the necessity to either download units off the Engage NY website or go out into the marketplace and purchase an ELA curriculum for an elementary school, or some variant of writing it yourself, we decided to take the existing balanced literacy project because we were committed to elementary school, particularly to the workshop model of balanced literacy as the delivery system. To say, well, let's sort of take some risks here and pivot that project to writing the curriculum ourselves, because we felt like we couldn't peel off one teacher per grade level and do a summer curriculum writing project, only including one person for each grade level, and maybe some special ed people like these grade based. We needed it was an all-in thing, we had to get everybody involved in that project. So we pivoted to that, and then we've been over the last 2.5 instructional cycles writing that curriculum. We're not quite finished yet, and it's been a bumpy ride because we've asked an awful lot of our instructional personnel, because we've asked them to design and write curriculum while they're delivering it, review and revise it as they go along. And so they've been working with us in that regard. I think we're at a place now where we're close enough. I don't have penultimate versions of each of those documents, but I'm getting closer and feeling more optimistic. And the same kind of thing holds true in middle school as well. So we've had a consultant in elementary school and a consultant in middle school. So it seems wise at this juncture to really talk about sunsetting that project in a phased manner rather than just chopping it off. And what we're hoping to do temporarily at least is to pivot back to the classroom and do some consultant work to support balanced literacy. And absent that need being clear and the commitment being clear coming out of the 2 schools, to start to sunset that project and pivot to some other things. So this seems like a reasonable start and an opportune moment. So that's what that's about.
So I have no question with that. My question would be, so it may just be that you have to put a cut on your list, but there's still a need for professional development or additional, wouldn't it be wise maybe to keep that money for another program in ELA or maybe the Rick Campbell program or something that there's still a need for? It may just be that you had to put something on here, but.
Well, in an ideal world, just playing my cards, you don't want to cut anything on the PD side because, that's your engine of innovation in your organization. So to say, well, we've got a little pot of money, which really isn't that large anyway, what is it, $40,000 or so overall, if you've got 30 days times 1350, that's your 40K range. You'd like to say, well, where's the next frontier? What's the most important next step? Have a focused conversation around that and start to reallocate some of the money. We've had some preliminary conversation about that. So if we hadn't been put in a position by our governor and the state department to do cuts, that would be a conversation we'd have.
So is that what you would think you would do if we don't need these cuts, that you would try to?
That'd be part of the CA discussion for the ensuing years, engaging with the professional faculty around how they perceive, their relative, strengths and weaknesses and
how we support that. But everything is a reluctant release, but to manage the pain, I've done it in small chunks, essentially, with the hope that if we needed to move back to some kind of project at some point, we could perhaps start to build that back into the budget. That's pretty much how
It's just sometimes when it's gone, it's gone.
yeah.
Rick, you had your hand up?
Mine goes to telephones. It says eliminate the cell phones, and it's not complete, so we're not gonna lose our Twitter account here, or seriously?
Sheldon, you want to talk about that?
It's actually not my department. We eliminated all the cell phones in my department a while ago, so it's other department cell phones that are still in my department. So it's easy for me to put that out there.
We can do this without endangering health, safety, or Twitter.
Absolutely, it's not, like I said, it had nothing to do with my budget.
What would we be looking at? Don't tell me it's hard.
Well, what would happen is, and actually over the years, you know, people have gone to their own private cell phone. There are a few district personnel who have district personal phones that there's only 3 of them. So they would have to come up with their own personal phone or a different way of communicating. One of the ways we communicate and how Sheldon's folks communicate is by radio. So they're able to, you know, talk to each other by radio, and if they're not on campus and Sheldon or someone needs to talk to them, they have their personal cell phone numbers and they just call their personal cell phones. If they happen to be down at Williams Lumber and, hey, pick up this while you're down there, you know, they just, instead of, they just have to call a personal cell phone. So, like I say, there's 3 individuals that either, one of 2 ways, either that department would pick up that expense or they would have to get their own personal cell phone. I'm one of those people. When I came here, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a need for it. But I needed one for work, so I got one. But, you know, if they're eliminated, that's fine, I'll go out and get one. But there are 2 other people. One of them has been a great, it's been good because that person is out and about in the building. It's a good way to communicate with that person so that they can go from one emergency to another emergency without having to treps all the way back to their office and then find out, oh, geez, I was just at that classroom 2 classrooms down. You know, that's a doable thing. I mean, they were for business purposes, but, and mine before was strictly for business purposes, but that's kind of changed over the past couple of years, you know.
In the past, all my guys had cell phones, and previous budget cuts, we eliminated those cell phones, and used their personal phones. And they don't have any problem.
Just telephone.
Lisa?
Tom, this question's for you. The discussion about professional development and, you know, ways to creatively cut in that area raised a question that I had been asking myself when I had been looking over these lists, which is this an area where we have tended to over budget and have had money left over at the end of the year? And if so, is this an area where we can reduce our estimations of how much we need and yield some money
No, when
there?
it comes to professional development, Marvin's very good and the principal's very good. They use a lot of that budget. I think if they tend to overestimate in one area, that would be the travel and conference. People going away to conferences. That seems to be the only area that a lot of times doesn't materialize, but like the summer curriculum, those type of things, and those are used almost right up to the exact penny. In fact, we use also federal grants to supplement it. So professional development, other than the travel and conference, I think it's a tendency over the past few years is that teachers don't want to be out of the classroom to attend a conference. Or we find that it's not worthwhile to go to a national conference in Dallas or something of that nature. That just, it can tend to be like $5,000 to go through that, and well, I'll get my professional development through other ways, whether it be attending conferences in Albany and that. You know, I don't think anybody's gone out of state in, God, years to attend a national type of a conference. So that was the only part, I think, of professional development that we don't use. The hours and the salaries allocated to it, we go right up to it, right up to it.
Okay. I mean, I note that you have a number of items on the Tier 2 list involving travel and conference, some of which are cut entirely and some of which are only cut partially. Is there more room to cut back on those?
That would be a question to each of the personal, principals and to Marvin. I mean, I'm not, they're the one who decide what's going on as far as that, that's just my general observation. I don't, could they be cut back a little bit? Probably, but if someone does come up with the potential of a great opportunity, but it's in San Diego this year, well, yeah, we can't go because that money was taken out of the budget.
Right.
So that's something that the professional educators in the professional development realm need to answer that.
My guess is San Diego's probably a stretch. I'd
Going to San Diego.
I'd rather talk about going to Syracuse for a conference than going to San Diego. I think that's more realistic. And I can't think of the last time we sent anybody to a national conference. I'm not saying we never have, but it would be more, anything further away than BOCES would require travel and conference money to get there, so. But whether that can be cut back, I mean, it could all be cut back, then we're not sending anybody anyplace.
Well,
so
no,
we're not-
but the premise of my question was, is this an area where we've tended to budget more than we've used, and can we tighten that assumption in order to realize some savings? That's why I posed the question to you.
The only place
I
would
see
be.
hands up in the audience.
Just in response to that, the town is great about giving us the spending patterns over the past 4 or 5 years. So we can gauge, as a building principal, I can gauge on that code travel conference, we only spent 80% of what we budgeted for. So that's how we try to target a request for the upcoming year. And that's one of the places Mr. Brunel and Mr. Brunel are great, where Mr. Brunel may sharpen his pencil and say, well, the past 4 or 5 years, you only spent this much, so it's a conversation. So I'd say that, we're very attentive as budget developers to that history, so we can be as accurate as possible in estimating our needs for the upcoming year.
Okay.
John, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to echo really what Ed said. My travel and conference budget is relatively small, about $3,000, and we typically don't use a lot of it, but I would hate to eliminate it altogether because there are opportunities that come up during the year. There are conferences that, based on a curricular mandate from the state or something that isn't within our control, where we're forced to send somebody to additional training and to not have any money in those budget codes. I think to eliminate it altogether.
Laura?
So along those lines, thank you, gentlemen. I would be loath to cut PD, given where we are in developing an entirely new curriculum in all 3 buildings. Science curriculum's changing, the history curriculum's changing. Let's not try to cut that if possible, my personal opinion, because these teachers have a lot of work to do, and they need all the support they can get to get us there. So.
Diane?
I have a couple questions for John. First one, for the intramural program, have the participation numbers gone down there? I mean, that's been a...
Well, not necessarily. However, we're currently not running a program. Over the course of the last couple of years, it's become very difficult to find individuals that are available to run activities after school. And if you recall, when we set this program up, we have a coordinator that kind of oversees the various activities that are going on, and then they go out and they solicit faculty and staff that are willing to and able to run programs, whatever those programs might be, and then we pay those individuals per session. Unfortunately, over the course of the last 2 years, and I think the writing was on the wall last year, we found it very difficult to find individuals to run activity sessions. It became, it's just not a viable use of money. When we did run programs, the numbers were good. Unfortunately, we chose not to run a program this year because we didn't want to pay a coordinator to coordinate activities that we couldn't find people to run.
And can you talk about the effect of the team lead, the reduction in 5 to 3 days for the team leader?
My BIC is building instructional council, and that's basically the 4 team leaders, the 3 grade level team leaders, and then we have, what we call a lifelong learning team, a team leader that really kind of encompasses all of those other, all of the other special area teachers. But I typically meet with the 4 of them the week following the end of the school year, and then the week prior to the beginning of the school year. Again, in a perfect world, I wouldn't be cutting anything, but I think that we can get the work that we do done, even if we reduce that time by a couple of days.
Okay. And then the last question is on the second item. Am I correct to say that this would really have no effect on students in 6th grade based on the numbers going in? I mean, their class sizes would stay about the same. And I don't know, Joe, if you'd rather him just explain that whole number 2. I mean,
They're all part and parcel with one action.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if we could do that anyway.
It's a numbers game, and I'm looking at next year, and I'm looking down the road. And currently, I have 5 sections in 6th grade. This would reduce each of the content areas by 1 section, and we would, were we to divide, I think it's currently 69 or 70 kids in 5th grade. Across 5 sections, we'd be looking at class sizes of 12, 13 kids. Even cutting that down to 4, we're still looking at class sizes of 17, 18 kids. And looking ahead to the future with the grade levels that are coming up through the elementary school, reducing from 5 to 4 sections, we're looking at sections, in the 20, low 20s range. It's certainly very good.
so it would be fair to say that even if we don't have to make any cuts, that this would be a wise move going forward?
Again, I don't know that I'd advocate for cutting anything. But, the numbers are the numbers, and in terms of justification, this allows, I think, between Ed and I, in the middle school, high school, to reallocate some staffing elsewhere where we think there's a greater need.
I think, again, with all due respect to John, who did not come forward saying, hey, I got some money here I can and in a perfect world, would we love to have class sizes of 12 kids any-place? But again, I keep coming back to a $3,000 gap.
300.
$300,000.
Yes.
$300,000.
Wanted to be 3,000.
$300,000 gap.
Oh, really?
3,000? Okay.
And with 30 fewer kids coming into the middle school, it's hard to justify class sizes of 12 when we need to potentially cut 300,000. And even if we didn't, I think the reality is, are there things we could better be spending that money on? We have a whole list of those things from back in December. It seems to make sense, but again, I'll go on record and say John was not tripping over himself to get that on the list. I had to prod him, understandably, because he's doing what he's doing. He's advocating for his staff and his program, but I think class sizes are still very good for middle-level classes, and because we have many of our teachers in all of the subject areas, not in the middle school, I'm talking about more in the high school, who are teaching 6 classes. It will enable us in virtually every case to maintain full-time positions there, which I've always advocated with this board, that if there's a way we can keep people at full-time and they're quality people, the best way to encourage them to leave our district is to cut them back to 0.8 or 0.6 because people want to work full-time. So with some shifting around of responsibilities, we would be able to make that change, and it would impact one person who is already part-time and who has been part-time since we hired her, and that person has never been a full-time person who's been reduced to part-time. Actually, that person was a 0.4 FTE person who had to be increased to 0.6. But those are responsibilities that if we go to 4 sections in 6th grade, ELA teachers would be able to pick up some of that slack. So programmatically, there would be little, if any, impact. May even, again, we haven't sat down and charted this whole thing out. That's where I lock John and Ed in a room and say, don't come out till you figure this one out. But given the fact that so many of our teachers, especially at the high school, teach 6 classes already, it's either going to keep all of those professionals employed at a 1.0 level, or it's going to open up possibilities to potentially add some other programs or provide additional AIS someplace else in those specialty areas than we have now. So it seems like a win-win to me, but that's just my opinion.
Well, John, I appreciate you finding the least painful way to do this. And I would just go back to your point you made with the Chancellor teacher, that even if we don't have to make cuts, that, this might be a luxury that we still necessarily can't afford, and it still might be the right way to move forward as all the smaller classes move on.
Well, I think putting some of these things on these lists of potential cuts is maybe a less painful way of broaching the conversation about them.
I don't see any more hands up.
Oh. Well, we'll move on to
ahead,
the
Laura.
last item on tier 1. The computer lab in the middle school. John, Steve, one of you want to talk about what that means?
As some of you, or maybe not all of you, I don't know if Joe or you had time to go through all the plan A, plan B.
Yeah, take 3 minutes. No, I mean, I'd say you could take 5 or 10 minutes at least to get that conversation started.
Just very briefly, originally we had a plan where we were going to, we started at the elementary school for this year with, I'll call it the introductory phase of technology. And we were looking at next year, and this again was the original plan, as called out as recommendations in the self-audit, was to go to a one-to-one environment at Chancellor. Then the following year begin to, I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version here, but the following year move up into the middle school, following year after that move up to the high school. There were two things that concerned me about that plan even at that time, and that was, one of them was, it was an aggressive plan, number one, but people, there was a real sense of openness to do that. And 2, it also delayed the amount of time before technology reached the secondary schools, because we were going to infuse there quite heavily and infuse the technology there and then slowly move our way up. So there was actually 3 to 4 years before even high school was using technology. A couple of things that come into play because of that, and one is cost and capacity. Those are the 2 things that come into play. Obviously, as Tom and Joe have articulated today, it's been a difficult year fiscally to look at things, and to move Chancellor to a one-to-one is a huge financial lift. That's a big price tag comes with that. You got 6th grade, basically half the district over there that you're trying to bring up technologically on a one-to-one basis. So that was one piece of it. The other is capacity, and that was the ability of the staff to be able to teach in that type of environment. And so with those 2 factors in play, we began to look at what would be an alternative to that could be responsible and responsive to the student's needs. So rather than looking at a one-to-one at Chancellor, we would be going and actually moving up to the middle school level this year. There's some advantages to that. One is the middle school has only 3 grades in it. And so it was less of a fiscal impact upon the budget to do that. So when we began to that process, essentially, we met, John and I held a extended meeting with the teachers, and we discussed a lot of the factors involved in selecting technology and software and how it affects curriculum and all those kinds of things. They have essentially looked at a model very similar to the Chancellor, which was one cart per grade, along with an iPad cart that would be shared among all 3 grades. And again, there are some other caveats in there, but that's essentially the plan. We also then began to look at the lab itself. And the lab is got computers in it, they're running Windows 7, but they're aging computers, they're reaching end of life. So the idea was, we do have a lab, it can be operational, but this piece of it we may have to look at. And we wanted to do that and upgrade that lab along with the rest of the building, with the idea that the lab serves as a purpose to support the curriculum for the rest of the schools. So one of the things the teachers articulated very well was that I don't have time to teach Word, or I don't have time to teach Excel in and of itself, but I need the students to know Excel to run some analysis, do something that the curriculum demands. So the role of the lab would be to support that in that environment. So we began to look at that. Also playing into this is that we've had several discussions. Marvin and I have had a couple of discussions with the staff about revamping the entire curriculum 6, 7, and 8. There was a recognized need to do that, and a recognized need to upgrade that, and to really substantially change that curriculum. The variable that's still out there is how is just replacing computers enough to do that, or when we began to look at different programs and looking at other innovations that are out there, particularly at the middle level, is it enough just to replace the computers in the lab, or are there going to be other variables out there? We have to look at that. But given the budgetary constraints that we have, we began to look at this as a possibility where we might be able to write a grant that would enhance this lab. And so that we're beginning to also look at that as a possibility. Technically, can we run that lab the way that it is? Yes, it's functional. I wouldn't say that it can meet all the needs that may be coming up on the curricular side. So that's why it's on the list. That's the short answer. Is
Thank you.
Diane?
So one question I have is it feasible to revamp the curriculum, change the lab, do all that by September? That's a lot to be done, and what if it's not ready in September when the kids are ready?
Well, anything that's on a lease purchase, which is the avenue mechanism by which the district's decided to go with supporting technology, no. The answer would be September is not the way to do it. Would not be here in September. Basically, upon approval of the budget here, we have to then go to Dutchess County BOCES. They have to approve that lease, and they meet once a month. So now you're looking at June. Then it goes to Orange Ulster BOCES.
No, Suffolk.
Or Suffolk.
Suffolk.
Thank you. To another BOCES, who then meet once a month. They have to vote on it, and then the order can be placed. And then you're in the queue of whatever vendor that been selected or model that you buy. So through the lease purchase agreement, no, it would not be here in September.
The only way we would be able to have such a lab up and running in September would be if we bought it outside of the contours of our budget, which means buying it through lease purchase. If we got a grant for that money, then we could purchase those machines outright. We would not use grant money to buy them through lease purchase. We'd use grant money to purchase them outright. We wouldn't be going through BOCES, therefore we wouldn't have the 2-month time period to have Dutchess BOCES approve it, then have Suffolk BOCES secure the funding. In that case, those machines, depending on when we might get such a grant, those machines could be here by summertime at the latest, then we'd be able to be up and running by September. So it all depends on the funding source and therefore the methodology for purchasing them.
And what about the, Marvin, I guess this would be more for you, revamping that curriculum, is that something that can be done in that time period, and does it have to be done? So if we have new devices, can we teach the curriculum we have, or do they have to be done at the same time, and is that possible by September?
A couple of planning meetings around the topic of rewriting in total the computer curriculum for 6, 7, and we kind of conceptualized it around a series of topics that we're going to kind of strand through the 6, 7, 8 courses. And so some of that is going to involve just focused curriculum work. That'll be pretty easy to get done. We've got some freestanding things that we'll be able to just kind of drop in as a result of our relationships with Microsoft, for example. They have Academy, so on the computer app side, we're going to be able to kind of drop some of those strands in for like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, things like that. There's actually some self-paced programs that we'll kind of drop into those courses. We've already got a keyboarding program that's kind of up and running, that's pretty well liked, so we'd like to do much with that. There are some things we're going to have to add, though, if we're staying with the idea that we've got now. So we've got this sort of nascent idea of dropping a coding strand into 6, 7, and 8. So that would require some probably off-site training and things like that. So that's a logistical challenge we have to meet over the summer. But I think in terms of just gutting out the core of the curriculum for the 3 courses, I think that's doable. And if we had the upgraded lab, I think we could make it fully utilized by the fall. Again, that's a pretty brisk and bracing timeline for me, just thinking about it. But it is doable because we've already kind of queued it up, and I've had conversations with Susan Black and Judy Moore. And, I think we could certainly make full use of, if not having each strand perfectly ready to go, we'd certainly be ready to start and then do some of the development.
And would it keep the same schedule? Like the changes you make would keep the same schedule the way the kids have it now, whether it's every other day or?
You're talking about master schedule?
Yeah, as far as
Yeah,
how
that's
often
really
they,
the question,
as far as how
John.
often they meet, like, one of the
Yeah,
6th graders every other day.
That would be the idea now. We'll have to find out whether or not other changes dictate we have to move that around. And
Laura?
The master schedule will begin with core content areas, and then we build everything else around those subject areas.
So, given the PD desires and the hardware need, 13.5 is only for the hardware. It doesn't take into account the curricular needs. So what are we really talking about to get the middle school computer lab where we want it to be if we could?
That's right, the number is the 13 times 3.
Yeah, first of all-
Just the hardware. The other variable that's out there is if when Britain brings in some other additional supplies or materials needed that they want to incorporate, that would be an unknown.
Okay, so I'm just thinking in terms of grants, for instance.
Well, the
If we-
13.5 represents 1 year of a 3-year lease.
I understand,
Okay.
I understand. But if we're talking about taking this out of the budget and looking for a grant to fund a computer lab in the middle school, what is that number really?
Well, it is the 13 times 3, but
Right.
also, let's say, for instance, the curriculum tree design requires some workspace, for instance. And I don't know, again, this is a variable. We may look at saying, well, we want to redesign that lab. So there may be actually taking down that center, I don't know, we've been in the room before, there's a central wall there. We may have to take that out. We don't know whether that's the case at this point. We don't know what the curriculum is going to demand. So again, as the curriculum is driving this engine, it may require some retrofit of that room to accommodate that. That will know as we go down the line with part of the teachers. And look at that space in the curriculum, being able to do that. Whether we do it, we don't know yet. But that's a possibility. So there's a grant out there to do that, might have that. But I don't know what that number is. That's certainly going to take some research to do.
Okay, so ballparking it, we could be talking about $60,000 to $100,000 all in?
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's certainly within the realm of possibility, yes.
And they're working up that proposal as we speak.
Diane?
My concern is still beyond the timeline. There's a lot that still has to happen, and we're at the end of March. Is it at all possible to make it happen for like January? Or is that, I mean, I know that's not an ideal situation because you still have kids that have to do something in September, but is that more realistic, or moving it another year just to do it right instead of to just kind of throw everything out there and hope that it's ready?
So I'll take on this part of that. It does feel brisk in terms of the redesign of the lab and the redesign of the curriculum and getting all that done between now and September. That said, the curricular redesign is a necessity no matter what we do with the lab. We sort of universally recognize that that's an absolute necessity to do those two courses. So we're doing that no matter what happens, and that needs to be ready to go by the time we start school reform. So I have some budget allocations within my budget already to perhaps pay for some curriculum. What we didn't necessarily budget for was adding those additional creative and innovative strands into those courses. So if we just go status quo, the way that lab looks now, that we'll probably have to strip that down to a more bare bones approach and just meet the immediate needs that we have. If we feel like we can vision this a little bit and build this thing out a little more, and maybe a little more innovation, then that'll put some pressure on the timeline. But I would say we did this very same thing with Project Leadway Lab downstairs, and we turned that over in the summer. So I think a lot of it is just really getting one of these initial phase conversations closed, clear where we're headed, the funding allocated, because a lot of the revamping work will be done in-house by our people, maybe some partnerships with BOCES. So once we're clear, we usually can get these kind of things done pretty quickly.
Are there programs out there that you can, I mean, Project Lead the Way, there was a program that we just had to adopt. Is there middle school programs that we could draw from? And
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's kind of what we've been looking for, is to try to avoid this tendency to try to have to reinvent the wheel around some of these things. So there are coding academy training possibilities. As I said, there is the Windows Academy for the Windows platform kind of tools. There's some other things that we're talking about. You know, internet safety to be HIPAA compliant. There are curriculum already developed, so we'll be just looking to take that, integrate it, and Rhinebeck-ize it, if you will. So all things being equal, it's doable, but it is a risk case. And we need to be about it fairly quickly. Which, like Joe said, we are working on developing that now.
Lisa, I see your hand about to go up.
This is the sort of question that I would like to ask as the last question, if possible, because it's something that I'd like to ask, but if people have other substantive questions, I would prefer.
Okay.
On the level one,
It's a level
just
It's
the
more
level
minus
general.
one.
Tier one.
General.
Tier 1, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Diane?
there is a question I have to ask. It's not a big question, but Sheldon, how do we cut $3,000 of water? I just have to ask. We talked about it in finance, and I just don't know the answer.
That's irrigation water, so if we
For the
have.
field.
It's metered water,
If
right?
we have rain,
For the
then
fields.
it's not an issue. If we don't have rain, then we have to irrigate.
But how do you know, like, do we?
We don't have to irrigate, but.
You don't turn the
Do we
spigot
buy
on.
water by the,
It's metered.
it's
Yeah.
metered, that's like, okay, basically you're buying water. Okay. I just had to ask, I'm sorry.
Everybody bring one of these with them.
Yeah, right.
Pour it on
Sprinkle,
the field.
we'll poke
Right.
holes in the top.
Okay, is there anyone else that has a, question about any of the tiers? All right, I think we'll go to Lisa then.
Okay. So this is my third year doing, engaging in this process, and for sure, the past 2 years, I recall that our assistant principals have sat very quietly and patiently in the audience and not been asked to say a single word. So I'd like to give you guys the opportunity, if there's something that you think would help us in the process that we're going through, I invite you to add it now.
As for me, Brett fills me in on what's going on. We discuss a lot of things, so a lot of my input has gone to him and through him. So I appreciate that. It was very nice of you, but I don't feel anything else.
Yeah, along that same vein, I work really closely with everybody, so we've had a lot of meetings throughout. We've kept abreast of what's been going on at all, high school, middle school, and some of the elementary as well. So, yeah, I'm pretty open in that thing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, in case you weren't aware, we make them suffer through our weekly administrative meetings, so like it or not, they probably know more than you want to know. But, they're pretty much up to speed on all of this stuff.
Thank you.
Deirdre?
Just in the same spirit, I just wanted to ask Sheldon if there's anything other than speaking to the grass irrigation that we should hear from you about at this point.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone have any final words? Or
We're going to look at the wish list now.
Well, you can if you want.
Well, just in case there's questions.
Wish list.
Sure.
Since we have them
Yeah, yeah,
captive
yeah.
for another 10 minutes.
That's where the
We'd like to think positively that we'll need that.
Yeah, because King Cormo's gonna come up with millions.
All right, so Tom's going to hand them out. While he's handing them out, I thought I'd make a few parenthetical comments, a little bit of the back of the envelope calculations here, because this will give us a context for where we go next. If we backed out the placeholder for the CLS teacher, if we backed that out of Tier 1, and we added it to the entire Tier 2, that would be $216,000. If we added the entire Tier 3 to that, that would add up to $365,722. Almost exactly the amount of money in the gap elimination adjustment, just by the way, but that's purely coincidental. So again, just so you're aware that if we did not remove, just for the purposes of our discussion, if we did not remove that placeholder elementary school position, and kept everything in the order that I gave it to you, which is, there's nothing sacred about that order, but if we just went right down the list, I asked Tom to calculate at what point would we get to the $300,000 limit. So that would be all of Tier 1 and
Pages 1 and 2.
pages 1 and 2 of Tier 2 and the top 1, 2, 3, 4 items on page 3 of Tier 2. Just to let you know, if we took it strictly in that order without moving anything around, that's where we'd have to get $300,000. Again, what I just said, I believe, will be a totally academic exercise, because I would be very surprised if there was not a cent more of state aid once the dust clears. But I don't know that, and there is absolutely no telling how much more than zero that might be. So I think, just in terms of the contours of the process, that gives you an idea as to how deeply we would have to cut into these potential cuts, with some qualifications, as we've discussed them this morning, to get to the whole, to get the whole enchilada taken care of in terms of the gap.
How far into Tier 2?
Page 3 of Tier 2 through the first 4 items.
And that's just an approximation.
Yeah,
To give us a
One or two lines
gives you a
down
pretty
or
good
up,
idea
but
how far
just-
we'd have to cut into that to get to the full 300,000.
Right.
And on top of all this other discussion, I mean, Tom is very good about doing this, so I want to give him public credit. I mean, he is constantly looking at this and making little tweaks here and there, so it may change some without us cutting anything between now and Tuesday or now on the 14th of April. I mean, this is a constant part of that process right through the time when we present you with a recommendation for a budget to adopt on April 21st. So, yeah, this thing is, and hopefully the changes are all to reduce the budget. We never know when we're going to come across something that requires us to add money in. So, it could float back and forth, up and down on that axis, but anyway, hopefully this has been helpful in terms of knowing where we are in terms of the worst case scenario, which is essentially what we're planning for this morning. Now, obviously, the best case scenario is we get more money, we have to take little, if anything, from these tiers. Maybe then we're actually back to looking at that other list, which is still somewhat inconceivable to me right now. I'd love to think we were going to be that fortunate. I'm not that optimistic, but you never know.
It's a happier list.
It's a much
nice way to
happier
end
list.
the morning.
So I don't know if you have any questions, Diane, or want to make any, or anybody want to make any observations?
I would just say that if, while we have all our administrators here, if anyone has any questions about these wish list items that they want to ask.
Does anybody need them? I'm not sure if you brought yours
And it's been
with you.
so long since they
I know,
even
we
looked
haven't
at
looked
this
at it
list.
since
You might
probably
want to
December.
you might want to give them copies of it.
Yeah.
And you'll note that these are only prioritized by building. I haven't had the opportunity to take my pen to this list, and I'm not going to flagellate myself by doing that until the state adopts a budget.
Just with a reminder
We're just
that
doing the
these,
Pollyanna thing.
unless we get some windfall from state aid, that we won't be looking at adding any of these items, but
You're right.
if anybody has questions about them, well, we have everybody here that, they can be answered, so. Diane has her hand up.
Well, it wouldn't be a budget workshop if I didn't ask John about foreign language. Still on here as a dream, or is it ever come, just whatever you'd like to say about that.
Well, I'll replay.
Rewind and replay.
The year before's answer. Again, while I would like to consider that at some point in the future, some of that has to do with master scheduling and where in the curriculum and where in 7th grade we're able to move other things around. Much of that has to do with what the decisions that are made going forward with the computer curriculum.
Right, maybe balancing the two.
So to create space in master schedule, to be able to go to a full day program, that eliminates something else.
I'd also like, not on that topic in particular, but to give everybody a context, you got this in early December, and to be honest with you, this is obsolete in some places today. I mean, for example, we've already, Steve talked about, reconfiguring the technology plan, and that was before we were even having that discussion. So there are several references to laptop cards that we're already planning for next year as an alternative approach. So you could take them out of there, just by thinking about this. What else? Reconfiguring the middle school computer curriculum. There was some nexus between, in prior years' discussion between that and foreign language. So now we're kind of moving down a different road with that than we were even thinking about at the beginning of December. So in all fairness, if we got that windfall, we would have to rework this list. But to be honest with you, the way it's been looking up to this point, the last thing these folks need is another academic exercise to reconfigure lists. But I bet you we could do it darn quickly if we got that windfall. I think I promise you we would.
Diane.
Felt on the asbestos removal, we talked about this before. See, I know it's not like, we don't have any more tactiles or anything, but it's something that we really wanted to continue to fix. So it's on here as a wish list, but I'm wondering, is it closer to a need than a want?
Probably
So is there nothing in the budget as it stands now for any asbestos removal?
not for, full classrooms.
Not a full classroom.
For some emergency, small, fix like we have done, in the past, yeah.
Just as a reminder, in the facilities committee, we discussed that, at some point, we may want to decide that we should put some money in the budget every year so that we could
Right.
remediate some, 2 or 3 classrooms every year, so that it's cheaper
Right.
to do it that way than if we had to do it in emergency, like, some tiles got loosened and we had to, do a remediation project, but,
Yeah, and
again,
that
it's on
item
the
is
wish list.
reflective of that conversation.
Right.
Right.
After the ECS, we'll be doing this summer. Some planning.
Yeah, that'll be instructive.
I don't know if anyone has any follow-up questions about this issue regarding facilities, because my point is actually rather different. So just looking over the wish list, I think that in a very powerful way reinforces for me something that I would like to affirm at that kind of 30,000 foot view, which is so many of the things on the wish list have to do with people, with adding human beings to the instructional program, to the athletic program, to support services, to the very important need of supporting all of the tremendous expansion of technology in our curriculum and supporting teachers in their learning, how to use this technology efficiently. And it just strikes me that even listening today to so many of you who've come and talked to us about your priorities, I think we need to keep that very much in our minds, that human beings are what make education work in many real senses. Having supplies and having fantastic new opportunities that come through other kinds of means, whether it's hardware or software or whatever, but it strikes me that looking at this wish list, it's teachers, it's people who we look to support the investments we already have made, and I very much think it's important for us to remember that when we try to make difficult decisions, and I certainly hope we're not in a position where we're going to have to make these difficult decisions, but today it was very, very helpful to hear from all of you how you think through this difficult kind of hypothetical situation, which we hope will remain hypothetical, but we have to be realistic in terms of making those decisions.
Laura?
And before we run out of time, Brett, I'm gonna call on you. The Rick Campbell grant, by the way, thank you for letting inviting your teachers to come talk to us. It was really great again this year. What's your dream? What do you want? Ending on an up note. What do you want for this project in your building? Is there any way that you can, on your own or in conjunction with, outside sourcing, continue this, grow this? The enthusiasm from those teachers, I hope, is as infectious as it was around this table in your building. So.
I think it is. I agree with that. Basically, really where we're at right now is we're actually meeting as a group this week after school to put together that exact thing, which is like, how do we move forward with this? One of the big things, and I even said it myself, that has come out of it that maybe wasn't part of the original grant, but it has really become a very powerful thing in my building, is those observations, the peer observations, things like that. That if we look deeper, there may be ways to do that. This kind of cutting it, it's kind of hard to do that and figure out how we would support that ourselves. In all honesty, one of the things we're going to be doing is talking about the possibility of outside sources. I mean, RSF has been great at supporting what we've been doing, even with some of the kind of changes, the organic nature of these people getting together and working. We brought on more teachers this second round. So one of the things we're going to talk about this week is that what that group is going to really talk about is exactly what their vision is. That was reflected to some extent what we talked about that night, moving forward. And again, the putting a structure in place for these professional learning communities, which is what this has really turned into, which is a great kind of, I think, just a great thing that has come out of this work with this group of people. We are going to start with some version of a grant proposal to the RSF, since they've been a partner with us. And then kind of actually do exactly that, discuss a little further over and above that, what might we want to do. Some of those initial conversations that Marvin mentioned earlier about repurposing some of those things, there may be ways we could actually have that conversation. I think the movement of that can't happen unless I can, just get in a room with some of the stakeholders. The curriculum office is one of those places to kind of decide what we might be able to do. I think we're in a place where there may be some restructuring of funding, possibly. Again, I don't know go out and say there is, because I don't think we've gotten to that kind of conversation. So anyway, I know really I've explained kind of really what I've loved that has come out of this. In addition to, by the way, teachers sitting in a room talking about the writing process and how they're pulling all this information from their students in a place that they actually didn't really know a lot about, which was starting with those extended responses in math and what we already have in place. So I think those two things, looking at student writing and having a conversation as a professional learning community as to what that means and how that will affect best practice in the classroom, in addition to how do we support that? Well, part of it is finding the logistics of them getting in rooms together and seeing each other teach. So it's a much bigger kind of, I think there's a lot more tentacles than maybe originally conceived even a year ago. Granted, if you think about it, 2 grant cycles are really just like a calendar year for the most part, even though they occurred in 2 different school years. So I think there's a place for both of those things outside funding, possible repurposing of some minor funds that we have that might help, get that going. There's another piece too. Part of the conversation that I've also injected into this is the possibility of, is there a third, and obviously this is part of the conversation I had with RSF, if there is a third kind of version of this that's being helped funded by outside resources, does it mean actually, are we at a point, and again, we're going to talk a little further this week about it, are we at a point where we can kind of develop a group of leaders out of that crew that can help turnkey some of those things? And if you notice, that was one of the kind of the things that I put down as a wish list item for it. If we were going to try to fund it ourselves, I think that's a big thing to figure out. So it might be worth actually downsizing the amount of people involved and figuring out a way where that structure can really inject itself into the daily practice in my building, and building some of those people who are really getting it, many of those people who have been part of the bulk grant cycles, to even turnkey some of that. I think that's another piece that we're willing, I think my staff has come to a comfort level where they're willing to have those conversations where even a year ago it was so uncomfortable that they didn't want to bring that to the table. So it really, for me, it has everything to do with just developing that professional learning community. What that might look like is that's actually what we're trying to do now. It took a little while for that group to find the time after school to sit down and have that conversation where they could all be available. So there's information coming on that, but right now there's kind of pieces we're trying to figure out. But again, supporting that PLC is just huge. It's really, for me, as an administrator, kind of looking down at 30,000 foot view, that's what has really come out of one of the very important things that have come out of this partnership. So it remains to be seen, but I think there's a future of it, what that looks like. We're talking about it this week.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Joe, anything else? Okay. Uh-oh, Diana.
Not just a procedural question. Will we have another meeting before the budget vote where the principals will be there? Just not being able to, in case there's other questions that we have as we.
Not unless you want them there. I mean,
Like,
we-
do they have their
Our
presentation?
April meetings are April 14th and April 28th. We have a special meeting on April 21st, which is where, short meeting to have the budget hearing, to have the budget adoption, and to vote on the BOCES budget and board members. So our next meeting is this Tuesday, then April 14th. So if the board decides that for some reason you want the building principals or other administrators to be there on the 14th, I mean, we can arrange the schedule to do principals reports on the 14th instead of the 28th. But if you decide you want them there, you need to let me know so I can give them some advance notice.
Probably would be a good idea.
Just to maybe flip-flop that anyway, just
Yeah.
in case.
In case there's word from Albany.
I wouldn't want them to have to come twice.
Well, I try to avoid having them come twice a month out of respect for their time. But if that's something that you know, let's,
We can talk about it Tuesday.
yeah, and I'll talk to them at the next administrative meeting. You know, maybe we can talk about that as a tentative, and again, if the governor comes to town next week with a bag of money, it may make that move. And I'm, you know, I say my prayers every night for that.
Let's hope so.
Okay, good point.
Okay, so I think we're at the end of our meeting. I'd like to thank all of our administrators for being here this morning with us. It's really helpful to have you all here to answer questions and, you know, advocate and all those sorts of things. Thank you all to our board members and our clerk and our superintendent and assistant superintendent for being here as well.
We should have a motion and a second and a vote.
We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Lisa, second by Deirdre. All those in favor? It's unanimous. That motion passes. Thank you for being here.